My unfaithful wife complained about her miserable marriage life while secretly sleeping with our kid's teacher behind my back, so I announced I'm leaving her at her party, and she is left faceless. Hey everyone, my name is Kevin, and I'm 42 years old. I work as an electrical contractor and have been in this field for years now. I've been married to my wife Lisa for almost 16 years. She's 40 and works in human resources at a mid-sized company. We have a daughter together named Sophie, who's 15 years old. Sophie isn't just a casual swimmer, she competes at a high level. This isn't some weekend hobby for her, it's become our entire lifestyle. We've traveled to swim meets in different states, and she trains 6 days a week religiously. The girl eats like an absolute machine to fuel all that training. Between Lisa's demanding HR job and my electrical contracting work, plus Sophie's intense practice schedule, our lives have been absolutely crazy busy for the last few years. Despite all the chaos, I genuinely thought we had developed a good system and that our family was solid. Let me give you some background about Lisa that becomes important later. She's always been incredibly sharp and intelligent, but she has this particular way about her where she carries herself like she's the smartest person in any room she enters. Even when she's completely wrong about something, she maintains that air of superiority. If you ever challenge her on anything, and I mean anything, she gets this specific look on her face like you just told her that gravity isn't real or something equally absurd. I'll give her credit where it's due. She's genuinely excellent at her job. However, she has this tendency to bring that professional HR energy home with her. She tries to run our family like we're all employees under performance review. My sister Crystal used to joke about this situation all the time. She'd say that being married to Lisa must feel like living with a supervisor who never clocks out. Looking back on everything that happened, Crystal wasn't wrong at all. For years, I didn't think too much about these personality quirks. We had our genuinely good moments together as a couple. We used to joke around a lot during the early years of our marriage, and we'd take these wonderful little weekend trips to Orlando. I actually enjoyed spending time with her back then. After Sophie came along, that closeness faded somewhat, but I figured that was completely normal. Parenthood changes the dynamic of any relationship, and I accepted that. What I didn't realize at the time was that Lisa wasn't just naturally pulling away from me due to the normal stresses of raising a child. She was actively setting up her exit plan, and I was too busy working overtime and packing swim bags to notice what was really happening right under my nose. The first sign that something was seriously wrong started when Lisa suddenly developed an intense interest in Sophie's swim practices. At first, I was actually happy about this change. I had been the one going to most of the practices for years, sitting on those uncomfortable metal bleachers and clapping like an absolute maniac at 6:30 a.m. meets. Lisa used to consistently make excuses to avoid going. She'd say things like, "I get bored just sitting there," or "the chlorine gives me headaches." These were her standard responses whenever I asked if she wanted to come along. Then one day, seemingly out of nowhere, she was completely into it. She started going to practices regularly, volunteering at swim meets, and even began chatting extensively with the coach. That's where Coach Dylan enters this story, and everything started to unravel from there. Dylan appears to be in his mid-30s and is an extremely fit guy who wears athletic gear like it's practically his second skin. He's not exactly what you'd call Mr. Personality, but Lisa suddenly could not stop talking about him. Every conversation somehow circled back to Dylan and his opinions. Dylan thinks Sophie should focus more on butterfly stroke. Dylan recommended this specific recovery protein powder. Dylan's wife is apparently into Pilates too. The frequency with which his name came up in our daily conversations became impossible to ignore. I remember joking with her once saying, "You mentioned Dylan more than you mentioned your own husband." She laughed it off, but something about the vibe felt completely wrong. Her laughter didn't feel like the genuine, warm laughter from our early years together. It felt forced and artificial, like she was laughing at me rather than with me. That distinction might seem small, but when you've been married to someone for 16 years, you know the difference between genuine amusement and performative responses. She then started bringing Dylan up during our family dinner conversations. It wasn't every single night, but it happened frequently enough that it stood out as unusual behavior. I tried to convince myself that maybe this was simply because she wanted to be more involved in Sophie's swimming career. Maybe she was finally taking a genuine interest in our daughter's athletic pursuits. I really tried to believe that explanation because I wanted our family to work. The situation escalated when Lisa announced that the coach would be coming over to our house. When I asked about it the first time, she casually explained, "Yeah, just to talk about Sophie's training program." I looked at her with obvious confusion and asked, "And you can't discuss training over the phone?" She just shrugged like I was the weird one for asking such a reasonable question. Have you ever experienced that tight, uncomfortable feeling in your chest that immediately tells you this isn't right? That feeling kicked in hard at that moment, but I kept it internalized. I didn't want to seem paranoid or controlling, so I stayed polite about the whole situation. I even offered Dylan sweet tea when he came over and sat there while they discussed training drills and techniques, acting like I didn't even exist in my own home. These visits became increasingly frequent, and Lisa began talking about Dylan more than she talked about her own family members. Simultaneously, she grew noticeably colder toward me. There was less warmth in her interactions, fewer jokes between us, and honestly, less of everything that had once made our relationship feel alive and connected. Then one Thursday afternoon, Lisa came down the stairs dressed up in a way that immediately caught my attention. She wasn't dressed formally or anything like that, but there was clearly effort put into her appearance. It was that casual, cute look that takes deliberate planning. When I asked where she was headed, she responded with complete nonchalance. "Oh, I'm taking Sophie to the mall. Just us girls." I paused for a moment, processing this information. "The mall?" I questioned. "Yeah," she said, grabbing her keys like it was the most normal thing in the world. "We just want some mother-daughter time. She's been asking for it. Now, I'm not stupid, and I know my daughter pretty well. Sophie rarely wants to do anything that doesn't involve TikTok or swimming. The idea of her specifically requesting a mall trip for mother-daughter bonding seemed completely out of character. But again, I was trying my best to trust my wife and give her the benefit of the doubt. I told her, "All right, have fun," and watched them leave. About an hour later, something started gnawing at me. I don't even know exactly what it was. Just this uncomfortable tightness in my chest, and this persistent nagging voice in the back of my head telling me that something wasn't right. So I decided to check Lisa's location using her phone. She had forgotten that I still had access to her Google location sharing from when she had set it up for safety purposes years ago. It was one of those in case of emergencies arrangements that couples sometimes establish. I guess she had completely forgotten that the location sharing worked both ways and that I could see where she was at any given moment. Sure enough, she wasn't at the mall like she had told me. Instead, she was at a restaurant. But this wasn't just any random restaurant. It was this fancy little bistro that we used to go to on our wedding anniversaries in the early years of our marriage. You don't take a teenager to a place that has an extensive wine menu and cloth napkins. That's definitely not typical mall food court material, and it certainly wasn't the kind of place for casual mother-daughter shopping trips. I got in my truck and drove over to the restaurant. I didn't go inside, and I didn't make any kind of scene. I simply parked across the street and watched from a distance. And there they were, Lisa, Sophie, and Dylan, sitting together at a table, laughing like they were some kind of happy little family. The family that I thought we actually were. Dylan was leaned back in his chair like he owned the entire table and restaurant. Lisa was smiling, really, genuinely smiling, in a way that she hadn't smiled at me in years. And Sophie was just sitting there like this was all completely normal behavior. The sight of them together like that, so comfortable and natural, hit me harder than I had expected. I didn't panic or lose my composure. I simply took a photo with my phone, nothing dramatic or invasive, just basic proof of what I was witnessing. Then I drove back home and waited. When they eventually returned, I waited until Sophie had gone upstairs to her room before addressing the situation. I looked at Lisa and said calmly, "Hey, how was the mall?" She blinked and responded, "Oh, it was nice. We got some good deals." I nodded and then said, "That restaurant you were actually at didn't look much like a mall to me." She froze completely. Then her entire facial expression changed in an instant. She didn't apologize for lying to me. She didn't offer any explanation for the deception. Instead, she went straight into attack mode, demanding to know why I was checking her location. "That's controlling, Kevin," she said. "That's unhealthy behavior." I stayed calm and asked her a simple question. "Why would you lie about where you're going in the first place?" She scoffed and said, "Because I knew you'd start making things weird and overreact like you always do." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was actually trying to turn this entire situation around on me, making me the problem for not believing her lie. I stood there for several minutes, just staring at her and wondering how our marriage had deteriorated to this point. Then I walked upstairs to Sophie's room to try to get some answers. Sophie's bedroom door was cracked open when I reached the top of the stairs. She was lying on her bed scrolling through her phone, acting like none of what had just happened downstairs mattered to her at all. I knocked lightly on the doorframe. "Yeah," she mumbled without even bothering to look up from her screen. "Hey," I said, stepping into her room carefully. "Can I ask you something?" She rolled her eyes dramatically and finally glanced over at me with obvious annoyance. "What?" she responded with that tone that teenagers have perfected. "That dinner with Coach Dylan tonight," I began. "Why didn't you just tell me that's where you were going? Why lie and say it was the mall?" She sighed dramatically, like I had just interrupted her at some red carpet event or something equally important. "Because it wasn't a big deal, Dad. Mom said not to make a thing out of it, and of course you did anyway." I tried to remain patient and explain my perspective. "Sophie, it's not just about the dinner itself. It's the fact that your mother lied to me about where you were going. You don't think that's weird behavior?" She shrugged with complete indifference. "You always overreact about stuff. It's not like they're doing anything wrong." I leaned against the doorframe, trying my best to keep my voice calm and reasonable. "You really think it's normal for your mom to have dinner with your coach in secret and then lie to me about it?" I didn't even want to go through Lisa's phone at first. I still had this tiny sliver of hope that maybe whatever was happening between her and Dylan was purely emotional at most. Maybe they hadn't crossed all the physical lines yet. That naive hope didn't last very long. One night, Lisa went upstairs for a shower while Sophie was already asleep. The house was completely quiet, and I was alone in the kitchen. That's when I noticed her phone was charging on the counter, a rookie mistake on her part. I don't know if she simply forgot about it or if she was just getting sloppy with her deception. But there it was, sitting right in front of me. I stood there staring at that phone for what felt like 10 minutes, my hands literally shaking as I debated what to do. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to just walk away, but the part that needed to know the truth eventually won out. I grabbed the phone with trembling hands. She had changed the lock code from what it used to be, but I decided to try Sophie's birthday day, month, and year. I pressed the numbers and heard that familiar click sound. It opened immediately. I honestly don't know if I wanted it to work or not, but it did, and there was no going back. I didn't go straight to her text messages first. Instead, I went directly to her notes app because I had seen Lisa typing in there frequently when she thought I wasn't paying attention. I figured that was probably her private stash spot for things she didn't want me to see. Unfortunately, I was absolutely right. She had full-blown love letters written to Dylan. Not just quick messages, but actual paragraphs that read like we were living in some cheesy long-distance relationship movie. I read one particularly painful entry that said, "I know what we're doing is wrong, but I've never felt more right in my life. I feel alive again. You remind me that I'm more than just a wife and a mom." As I read those words, all I could think was, wow, thanks for reducing your entire marriage and motherhood to jobs you're apparently bored with. There were also pictures saved in her notes, screenshots of text conversations I had never seen, saved voice memos that I didn't even attempt to open because I wasn't sure I could handle hearing them, and detailed recaps of their interactions. One entry described their first kiss in a hotel parking lot in explicit detail. That particular discovery hit me especially hard because I remembered that night clearly. I thought she was out getting groceries, and I'd even helped her unload the bags when she came home. I took photos of everything on my phone. I wasn't being dramatic or breaking things or planning to scream and yell. I knew I was going to need solid proof of what I had discovered, because if Lisa ever tried to flip this situation around and play the victim, I needed concrete evidence. I refused to lose everything to someone who could lie this easily and act like nothing was wrong afterward. After I closed her phone and put it back exactly where I found it, I backed away from the counter like the device was radioactive. I went into the garage, sat down on an old crate, and just stared at the wall for I don't even know how long. My mind was completely chaotic, but one thing had become crystal clear. I couldn't stay quiet about this anymore. I called my sister Crystal, and she answered on the second ring despite it being late. I told her everything I had discovered. The restaurant lie, the confrontation with Sophie, and now the evidence on Lisa's phone. Crystal was silent for a moment, then said, "Okay, now we stop being nice about this situation." That's exactly why I love my sister. She doesn't offer fake sympathy or try to gaslight you into questioning what you know to be true. She just gives you real, honest advice. Crystal told me to call a lawyer immediately, start moving money to protect myself financially, and get ahead of whatever Lisa might try to pull. "Don't confront her yet," she advised. "Just prepare yourself properly. You don't want to get blindsided by whatever she has planned." It was solid, practical advice that I knew I needed to follow. Sophie sat up on her bed and crossed her arms defensively. Maybe if you weren't always acting so suspicious and paranoid, she wouldn't have to lie to you. You're the one making things weird around here. That comment stung more than I wanted to admit. Here was my own daughter, essentially telling me that I was the problem in this situation. I closed her door gently behind me and stood in the hallway for a moment, trying to swallow the uncomfortable feeling that I was being systematically erased from my own family, one lie at a time. I didn't know what was coming next, but I knew with absolute certainty that this situation wasn't going to just disappear. I just had no idea yet how deep this deception actually went. I started noticing additional things after that confrontation. Not just the obvious lies, which were loud and clear, but the smaller, more subtle changes in Lisa's behavior. For instance, she suddenly stopped plugging her phone in next to our bed at night, like she had done for years. Instead, she started charging it downstairs in the kitchen. When I asked about the change, she claimed it was because the light keeps me up at night. She had never complained about phone light before in all our years of marriage. She also started using the key fob to lock our shared car, even when it was parked safely in our own garage. This was something she had never done before. These might seem like small details, but when you've been with someone for 16 years, you notice when their routine habits suddenly change without explanation. One time I suggested that we go to Sophie's next swim meet together, like we used to do as a family. She looked at me like I had asked her to donate a vital organ or something equally unreasonable. I already told Dylan I'd help set up for the meet, she said. We're driving together to save time. That was the first time in weeks that she had said Dylan's name directly to my face, and it felt like she wanted to make sure I heard it loud and clear. It's amazing how your brain starts connecting dots once you realize you've been manipulated and played for a fool. The next day, while Lisa was out at what she claimed was yoga, though I was now 99% sure this was either code for Dylan time or just her latest excuse of the day, I met with a lawyer. I told him everything that had happened, the lies, the secret dinners, the evidence I had found on her phone. He didn't even blink at my story. He simply said that I wasn't the first guy to get completely duped by a cheating wife with a nice smile and what he called a two-phone setup. The lawyer advised me to start protecting our assets immediately. So I opened a new checking account and moved half of our savings into it. This wasn't me trying to hide money. It was completely legal separation of funds. I also started making detailed lists of everything we owned jointly. The car, the house, Sophie's college fund, all of it. I needed to know exactly what was at stake. That night, Lisa came home acting completely normal. She asked if I wanted to order Chinese food like it was just another typical evening. I just stared at her, and I don't think I even answered her question. My silence must have made her nervous because she started saying how distant I had been lately. She suggested that we needed to reconnect as a couple and that maybe we should try planning a weekend getaway together. As she spoke, all I could think about was how she wanted to reconnect with the same person who had written, "I can still feel your hands on my skin," to another man in her notes app. I didn't take the bait or engage with her suggestion. I simply said I was tired and went to bed early. I laid awake for hours that night, listening to her brushing her teeth and humming like she hadn't just completely destroyed our marriage and was now dancing on the ashes. I started collecting information every single day after that. Anytime Lisa left the house, I would check the car's mileage and find excuses to verify whatever story she had told me. If she claimed she went to Target, I would ask what she had bought. Sometimes she would fumble her answers or couldn't provide specifics. One time, I found a receipt from a spa in the back seat when she had told me she was at Sophie's swim practice. She was definitely getting sloppy with her lies, and I was finally paying close attention to the inconsistencies. Meanwhile, Sophie was either completely oblivious to what was happening around her, or she was intentionally playing dumb. I honestly couldn't tell which. She wasn't asking any questions about the obvious tension in our house, and when I tried to do simple things like watch a movie together or just hang out one-on-one, she acted like I was annoying her by even suggesting it. I started feeling like a complete stranger in my own home. My wife was emotionally gone, and my daughter was slipping away from me too. But I wasn't going to start yelling or resort to playing dirty games. I was determined to handle this situation the right way, with solid proof, calm decision-making, and making sure that when everything finally hit the fan, no one could say that I didn't try to save our marriage or that I had overreacted to the situation. I wasn't planning to play detective forever. I just needed to gather enough evidence to end this marriage on my own terms. By that point, I definitely had what I needed. I wasn't guessing about anything anymore. I knew exactly what was happening. But there's a significant difference between knowing something and actually acting on that knowledge. I wanted the timing of my confrontation to be absolutely perfect. Not for dramatic effect, but for complete clarity. I wanted the situation to be so undeniable and clear-cut that Lisa couldn't find a way to weasel out of responsibility or somehow spin the narrative in her favor. That's when Lisa's birthday gave me an idea. It hit me one night while I was brushing my teeth and thinking about everything that had happened. What better day to serve divorce papers than the day she would be expecting me to play the role of loving husband and pretend we weren't sleeping in a bed completely full of lies? It might seem petty, but it also felt absolutely right to me. I called my lawyer and told him, "Let's file the papers. I want her served on her birthday." He paused for a second, then said, "Honestly, I've seen worse timing choices than that." So we went ahead and did it. The night before her birthday, Lisa was oddly chipper and upbeat. She told me she had booked a table at that seafood place we used to go to regularly before Sophie was born. She said she wanted to reconnect as a couple and seemed genuinely excited about the prospect. I swear she had the audacity to say, "I feel like things have been better between us lately." Like I hadn't just discovered her third set of deleted text messages to Dylan just 2 days earlier. This woman was either living in complete delusion or she was operating at Oscar-level acting skills. Maybe it was both. I played along with her enthusiasm and said, "Yeah, that sounds nice," while pretending I hadn't already arranged for her to be served with divorce papers before we even ordered appetizers. The morning of her birthday, I made coffee like I did every other morning. She came into the kitchen wearing that fake smile and cheerful expression that used to fool me completely, but now just looked like a customer service representative with a personal vendetta. Sophie was still asleep upstairs, so it was just the two of us in the kitchen. I handed Lisa the envelope. Plain manila, nothing fancy or dramatic about it. "What's this?" she asked, still maintaining that bright birthday smile. "Happy birthday," I said simply. Her facial expression changed instantly. It was like someone had flipped a light switch in her brain. First came confusion, then shock, and finally anger. "You're divorcing me on my birthday?" she said, with complete disbelief. I didn't even flinch or hesitate. "Yeah, I figured today's already a day that's all about you anyway." She started to say something in response, then stopped herself, trying to piece together whether this was actually real or some kind of cruel joke. I looked her directly in the eye and added, "Now there's nothing standing in the way of you being with Dylan. Congratulations." She immediately started going off on me, saying, "I didn't cheat on you. You always twist things around to make yourself look like the victim." I set my coffee mug down calmly and looked straight at her. "You didn't cheat? You're sure you want to say that with a straight face? Because I've got screenshots, timestamps, and GPS location history that say otherwise. You're not being framed here, Lisa. You just got caught." She opened her mouth like she had some devastating comeback locked and loaded, but nothing came out. Just more silence and the sound of her trying to process what was happening. Sophie must have heard the commotion from upstairs because she came down rubbing her eyes, still half asleep from just waking up. She looked at the divorce papers in Lisa's hand, then looked directly at me. "You're really divorcing Mom?" she asked. Then she said, "You're a coward." That accusation didn't hit me the way Sophie probably wanted it to. Honestly, it felt more like confirmation of something I had suspected. Sophie wasn't just automatically taking her mother's side in this situation. She had been on her mother's side this entire time. She knew what was happening, at least to some degree. I don't know exactly how much she was aware of, but she definitely knew something. And apparently, in her teenage mind, I was the one screwing everything up by refusing to just shut up and pretend everything was fine. Lisa kept ranting at me, saying I was selfish, bitter, and insecure. She claimed that Dylan was just a moment of weakness, and that I was making the situation much bigger than it actually was. I actually laughed at that comment. "You don't write detailed love letters for a moment of weakness, Lisa," I replied. She turned her back on me and walked away from the conversation. Sophie immediately followed her out of the kitchen. I stood there alone, still holding my coffee mug and staring out the window, like I was waiting for reality to finally catch up with what had just happened. Later that same day, Lisa's parents called me. I hadn't spoken to them in months, which wasn't particularly unusual since we were never especially close to begin with. They had always treated me like I was somehow lucky to have their daughter, even during the early years when I was working 2 jobs and keeping our household financially afloat while Lisa was still establishing her career. Her mother was the one who spoke first on the phone. "Maybe you're wrong about this whole situation," she said. "Maybe you acted too quickly without thinking it through. Lisa told us it wasn't what you think it was." I didn't bother arguing with them or trying to explain my side of the story verbally. Instead, I simply sent them a photo dump via text message. I included screenshots of Lisa and Dylan's love notes to each other, the "can't wait to be yours" text messages, and the picture I had taken of the three of them at the restaurant while Lisa had told me they were at the mall with Sophie. I didn't add any commentary or explanations. I just sent the evidence and left it there for them to interpret. They never replied to those messages. That night, Lisa barely spoke to me at all. Sophie wouldn't even look in my direction. I ended up staying in the guest room and spent most of the evening scrolling through job listings on my phone. It wasn't because I actually needed a new job. My electrical contracting work was going fine and I was financially stable. I was just looking for something that would make me feel like I had some control over at least one aspect of my life. I wanted to feel like I could change something in my world that wasn't built on a foundation of lies and deception. The next morning, Lisa sent me a text message from upstairs. "Can we talk later?" I didn't respond to her message. From that point forward, everything between us became incredibly icy and tense. We were still technically living under the same roof because, legally, I couldn't just leave the house without it potentially looking like abandonment in court. My lawyer had advised me to stay put and remain civil throughout the process, no matter how uncomfortable it became. But every single day felt like walking into a room where someone had died, and no one wanted to acknowledge what had happened. The atmosphere was suffocating and unnatural. Sophie avoided me like I was carrying some kind of contagious disease. She would only talk to me when she absolutely needed something practical, rides to places, money for something, or a signature for school-related paperwork. She didn't ask me why I had filed for divorce. She didn't want to hear any details or explanations about what had led to this decision. She had apparently made her judgment call about the entire situation and was committed to that position. Meanwhile, Lisa started actively trying to manipulate the narrative around our divorce. I would hear her on phone calls with friends and family members, speaking in a voice that was low, but just loud enough for me to catch bits and pieces. She would say things like, "He never really saw me as a person, and I felt completely invisible in that marriage, and I was emotionally alone for years before this happened." It was that kind of revisionist history that made my skin crawl. The thing that really got to me was that I had never yelled at her throughout our entire marriage. I had never hit her or been physically aggressive in any way. I had never cheated on her or betrayed her trust. I consistently paid our bills, supported her career ambitions, and showed up to every single one of Sophie's swim meets. I was present and involved in our family life. But apparently, being steady and consistent wasn't enough when someone decides they want excitement and validation over loyalty and commitment. Still, I didn't engage with her manipulation tactics or try to defend myself to people who were only hearing her side of the story. I focused on what actually mattered, documenting everything that was happening, keeping detailed records of our interactions, and preparing myself for whatever legal challenges might come next. I knew Lisa well enough to understand that once the initial shock of the divorce filing wore off, she would come back with some kind of strategic plan. She wasn't the type of person to just accept a loss without trying to spin the situation to her advantage somehow. I just didn't know yet how far she was willing to go to protect her image and maintain control. Then Lisa went completely cold in a way that made me realize this wasn't just a mistake or emotional lapse for her. This was pure strategy. She started treating everything like a business negotiation, like we were splitting up a company instead of dismantling a life we had built together over 16 years. And surprise, surprise, the first thing she tried to control was Sophie. One morning, she came into the kitchen while I was making breakfast for myself. There was no small talk or pleasantries. She just hit me directly with her opening move. "I think Sophie should stay here full-time," she announced. "Stability is important for teenagers." She delivered this statement with this weird, robotic calm, like she was reading from a prepared script. I didn't even respond at first because I was trying to figure out if she was actually serious about this demand. When I looked up and saw her waiting expectantly for my answer, like this was some kind of job interview, I simply said, "We're not doing this right now." That response was apparently enough to kick things into high gear. She started sending me emails, actual formal emails like she was my supervisor at work, with detailed proposals about how our separation should be handled. She suggested that I should move out immediately so that she and Sophie could maintain their routine and consistency. Those were her exact words. She even attached a drafted custody schedule that she had created using Canva, complete with color-coded blocks showing when I would be allowed to visit my own daughter. I forwarded that entire email chain to my lawyer immediately. He called me within an hour and said, She's testing your limits to see how much you'll tolerate. Don't flinch or give in to any of these demands. Around this same time, I started noticing that Lisa wasn't just focused on keeping Sophie with her physically, she was actively working to turn Sophie against me emotionally. I would pick Sophie up from school, and she would barely say 2 words during the entire car ride home. When I asked her how her day went, I'd get a shrug in response. If I tried to start any kind of conversation about anything school, swimming, her friends, movies, literally anything, I would get one-word answers and dramatic eye rolls. Then came the comments that made it clear Lisa had been coaching her. "Mom says you're just mad and taking it out on everyone else," Sophie would mumble when I tried to engage with her. It was like Lisa had downloaded some kind of parental alienation playbook and was systematically working through each chapter. So I made a conscious decision to stop trying to win Sophie back through conversation or explanations. Instead, I just stayed consistent with my actions. I continued making dinner when it was my turn. I still showed up to every single swim meet, even when Lisa acted like I was completely invisible. I remained calm and steady, even when Sophie made it crystal clear that she didn't want me around. I knew that one way or another, the truth would eventually break through all the manipulation and fog. But I had to be solid and reliable, not emotional or reactive. I couldn't give Lisa any ammunition to use against me in court by losing my temper or doing something stupid. Meanwhile, Lisa was ramping up her public relations campaign for everyone else. She started posting these carefully curated family photos on Facebook, featuring her and Sophie looking happy and close. She would caption them with things like, "Sometimes life takes you on unexpected journeys, but what matters is the love that remains." She even posted a birthday shout-out to me, tagging me and writing, "Even though we're on different paths now, I'll always appreciate the father you are to Sophie." I didn't reply to any of these posts, but I saved screenshots of all of them. Just in case she ever tried to tell a family court judge that I was hostile or unstable, I wanted evidence of her passive-aggressive social media performance. Then came the protective order threat, which was when I realized just how far Lisa was willing to go to control the narrative. We had gotten into a completely stupid argument about our shared car. I had gone to the garage to pick up some of my belongings from the trunk, and she claimed that I had scared her by approaching the vehicle unannounced while she was nearby. She started dropping hints that maybe she needed some space from me and that maybe she had talked to someone about establishing boundaries. I could see exactly what she was doing. She was trying to build a case that would paint me as threatening or unstable. So I preemptively filed for temporary custody rights to make sure she couldn't just freeze me out of Sophie's life on a whim based on some fabricated safety concern. I had already found an apartment and was ready to move into it, but I waited until the custody paperwork was officially filed because my lawyer had warned me that leaving the house without a formal custody agreement could backfire badly in court. Every single move had to be calculated and strategic now. This wasn't a marriage anymore. It was a chess game where the stakes were my relationship with my daughter and my financial future. Lisa wasn't happy about my preemptive custody filing at all. She accused me of escalating the situation unnecessarily and claimed I was making her life harder than it needed to be during an already difficult time. I looked at her and said simply, "You made your choices. I'm just responding to them." A few days later, she offered what she called a compromise. She said I could see Sophie anytime I wanted, with no restrictions or scheduling conflicts, as long as I agreed to give up any claim to the house. That was her real angle now, and it became crystal clear to me. She knew how much I loved that house. She knew I had built half of it myself, room by room with my own hands over the years. She wanted to win that battle, not just for Sophie's supposed stability, but because she wanted to come out on top. I told her to send that proposal directly to my lawyer instead of trying to negotiate with me personally. She definitely didn't like that answer. That same week, Sophie had a school event, some kind of end-of-semester project showcase where parents were invited to attend. Lisa got there early with Sophie, of course, positioning themselves strategically. When I walked into the school, I immediately spotted them talking to Coach Dylan. Yeah, he was still lurking around the edges of our family situation. He was standing way too close to Lisa. She was laughing way too much at whatever he was saying. And Sophie looked directly at me when I entered the room, then immediately looked away like I wasn't part of the picture anymore. I didn't walk over to join their little group. I didn't make a scene or cause any drama. I simply stood at the back of the room, watched my daughter present her project to the teachers, clapped appropriately when she finished, and then left without engaging with any of them. When I got home, I received a text message from Lisa. "Next time, maybe don't act like a stranger at your daughter's own school event." I replied, Maybe next time don't bring your affair partner to it. She didn't text back after that. Later that night, my sister Crystal called me. I hadn't even told her about the latest drama with the school event, but somehow she always seemed to know exactly when to check in on me. I told her everything that had been happening, about Lisa's custody demands, about Sophie's continued hostility toward me, and about Dylan still slithering around our family events like he belonged there. Crystal said, "You did the right thing, Kevin. Don't let anyone make you question that decision. She threw away her own family, and you're just refusing to let her burn you down with it." That comment really stuck with me because it captured exactly how I was feeling. The truth is, yeah, this whole situation absolutely sucks. It sucks knowing that my own daughter thinks I'm the bad guy in this scenario. It sucks walking into a house that I built with my own hands and feeling like I don't belong there anymore. It sucks watching someone else be welcomed and accepted by the same people who should have had my back through all of this. But I keep showing up anyway. I keep standing tall and maintaining my dignity. I don't yell or lose control of my emotions. I don't sink to Lisa's level of manipulation in games. And eventually, that consistency and integrity is what's going to make the real difference in this situation. The first real crack in Lisa's carefully constructed fairy tale came on a completely random Wednesday. I was at the house picking up some of my belongings. We had established this rotating arrangement while we were figuring out the final custody and living arrangements. Lisa wasn't home, and Sophie was at swim practice, so I had the house to myself. I came in, grabbed what I needed from my office and bedroom, and was about to leave when I noticed something was off in the kitchen. There was this folded piece of paper on the counter, right next to the fruit bowl. It wasn't a text message or a sticky note with a grocery list. It was an actual handwritten letter. It was addressed to Dylan, with no envelope, just folded once like it had been opened and read multiple times. Now, I wasn't actively trying to snoop at that particular moment. I already had more evidence than I could ever need for the divorce proceedings. But this note was sitting right there in plain sight, like it wanted to be discovered. I read it, and it was short, but incredibly revealing. Lisa was basically begging Dylan to meet up with her. She wrote about how much she missed how things used to feel, and that it's been really hard without you. That particular line told me everything I needed to know. Dylan had ditched her completely. She wasn't writing him passionate love notes anymore like the ones I had found on her phone. She was desperately trying to get him back, which meant their affair had crashed and burned. I didn't say anything to Lisa about finding that note. I didn't take a photo of it or confiscate it as additional evidence. I just stood there in the kitchen for a minute, thinking about how completely pathetic the whole situation had become. Here was a woman who had thrown away her entire marriage, and now she couldn't even manage to hold on to the guy she had thrown it away for. Later that week, I got confirmation of what I had suspected. One of Sophie's teammates' parents casually mentioned that Coach Dylan was no longer working with the team. He had stepped away suddenly, they said, due to some kind of personal drama. I never said a word to anyone about what I knew, but I guess word travels fast in small communities when your affair partner starts skipping swim meets and parents start asking questions about sudden schedule changes. Lisa didn't say a single word about Dylan's departure from the coaching position. She just acted like nothing had happened, like everything was completely normal. But I noticed that she stopped going to Sophie's swim practices altogether. No more showing up in expensive athleisure wear pretending to be the supportive mom. No more volunteer shifts working at the snack bar during meets. Suddenly, she was home all the time, which was a dramatic change from her previous behavior. Then the pathetic text messages started coming. They weren't dramatic or overly emotional, just these low-effort attempts to get some kind of response from me. "Hey, hope your week's going okay. Here, let me know if you want to get coffee and talk about things." Sophie asked if you're coming to her meet this weekend. I never responded to the first two messages because they were obviously fishing expeditions. For the third message about Sophie's swim meet, I replied simply, "Of course I am." I had never stopped showing up for my daughter, regardless of everything else that was happening. Lisa waited until the actual swim meet to try to have a conversation with me in person. I showed up early as usual and grabbed my regular spot in the metal bleachers. I stayed quiet and focused on watching Sophie warm up. When Lisa walked into the pool area, she came over to where I was sitting with that fake casual tone she uses whenever she wants something from someone. "Thanks for coming," she said, like I was some distant uncle doing the family a favor instead of Sophie's father, who had never missed a meet in years. I nodded politely but didn't engage further. There was this long, uncomfortable pause, and then she tried to get into what was clearly a rehearsed speech. Look, I know things got really messy between us, she began. I never meant to hurt you. I just felt so disconnected from everything. I stopped her right there. You felt disconnected, so you decided to cheat. You lied repeatedly. You involved our daughter in covering up your affair. You don't get to clean up this mess with therapy buzzwords and vague apologies. She got this hurt, wounded expression on her face, like I had just insulted her instead of simply pointing out the obvious facts. You don't understand what I was going through, she said defensively. That's when it really hit me like a ton of bricks. After everything that had happened, all the evidence, all the lies exposed, all the damage done to our family, she still hadn't taken genuine ownership of her actions. Not once had she said, I'm sorry, or I was wrong, or I take responsibility for destroying our marriage. It was just more excuses, more blame deflection, and more attempts to make herself the victim of circumstances. After the swim meet ended, Sophie came over to me with this awkward, uncomfortable look on her face. Mom said you were being mean to her, she mumbled without making eye contact. You shouldn't yell at her in public like that. I hadn't raised my voice even once during my conversation with Lisa. I looked at Sophie and said calmly, Sophie, I didn't yell at your mother. And if she told you that I did, then she's lying to you. Sophie just rolled her eyes dramatically. Whatever, Dad. And that was the end of our conversation. Sophie, man, that's the part of this whole situation that I still don't know how to handle properly. I understand that she's young and impressionable. I get that Lisa has been spinning this web of manipulation since before I even realized what was happening. But it doesn't make it any easier when your own child treats you like you're completely disposable. When she posts selfies with Lisa on social media and captions them, my ride or die, and then doesn't even acknowledge me on Father's Day. Still, I refuse to react emotionally or send bitter text messages. I don't argue with Sophie or try to force her to see my side of things. I document everything that happens, I stay calm and composed, and I continue to show up consistently. Because maybe one day, when Sophie is older and starts connecting her own dots about what really happened during this time, she's going to look back and realize that I never bailed on her. I never lashed out in anger. I just stood firm and maintained my integrity while everything else burned down around me. I didn't expect the actual end of our marriage to feel this quiet and anticlimactic. Once the final court date was officially set and the legal proceedings became real and unavoidable, Lisa went completely silent. It was like all the wind had suddenly left her sails. Maybe she finally realized that I wasn't bluffing about the divorce. Maybe she understood that there wasn't anything left for her to manipulate or control in this situation. At that point, the custody arrangement was leaning heavily toward Lisa getting majority time with Sophie. I made the difficult decision not to fight that arrangement aggressively. This wasn't because I didn't care about my daughter. Believe me, I care more than I'll ever be able to properly explain. But Sophie had made her choice crystal clear. Every single chance she had to ask me what had really happened, to hear my side of the story, or to understand my perspective, she turned away. She had bought into Lisa's version of events completely and wholesale. In Sophie's eyes, I was the one who had wrecked everything, so I let go. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do in my entire life. I found a new place to live and furnished it from scratch. Nothing fancy or expensive, but it was genuinely mine. It was quiet, clean, and most importantly, honest. There were no fake, "How was your day?" routines or forced family dinners. Just space where I could finally breathe again without constantly watching for the next lie or manipulation. My sister Crystal came over frequently during those first few weeks to help with practical things. She helped me paint the walls, hung curtains, and even brought me new dish towels that weren't from our wedding registry 17 years ago. That detail hit me harder than I had expected, realizing how much stuff I had to throw out or replace because it was tied to memories of Lisa. Down to stupid things like the salad tongs we never actually used but kept in the kitchen drawer anyway. One day, Crystal handed me a box of old family photos that she had found at our mom's house. "You'll need these when Sophie comes around someday," she said, matter-of-factly. I nodded and didn't say anything in response, but after she left, I put the box away for safekeeping. A week later, I received an email from my lawyer informing me that the final court date was locked in. The papers would be signed, and the divorce would be officially complete by the end of that week. It was really over. And for the first time in months, I actually felt like I could breathe normally again. Then, about 2 months later, she showed up at my apartment. Lisa appeared at my door, looking like she hadn't slept properly in days. She said she just wanted to talk, that she was losing everything, and felt desperate. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. I didn't invite her into my new space. She launched into this long monologue about how everything had moved too fast, how Dylan had played her and then dumped her when things got complicated, and how Sophie barely talked to her anymore unless she needed something practical like money or a ride somewhere. She said she felt like she had broken something fundamental that she couldn't fix, no matter how hard she tried. I let her finish her entire speech without interrupting. I didn't say much in response. I just stood there and listened to her lay out all the consequences of her own choices. When she finally looked directly at me, she asked, "Do you still love me?" The question caught me off guard, not because I didn't have an answer, but because I realized in that moment just how far I had actually moved on from our marriage. "I did," I said honestly, "but not anymore. Not after everything that happened." Her face fell when I said that, but I didn't feel bad about being honest. Not like I used to when I would try to protect her feelings. I wasn't saying it to hurt her deliberately. I was just being truthful for once in this entire mess. "I want to try again," she whispered desperately. "I want us to work this out." I nodded slowly and said, "You had an entire year to choose me. You chose him over and over again, repeatedly and consistently." She tried one more time. "That was all a mistake. I realize that now." "Yeah," I agreed. "And you made that same mistake at least 4 different times that I know about." Then I went back inside my apartment and didn't look behind me as I closed the door. Now I have a long road ahead of me, and I'm fully aware of that reality. Healing from something like this isn't some quick weekend project that I can knock out and move on from. It's going to take time, effort, and patience with myself. But it's mine to do on my own terms, in my own space, without lies buzzing around in every corner of my life like toxic background noise. Lisa made her choice when she decided to pursue Dylan. She chose secrets over honesty. She chose the temporary excitement and validation from a man who ultimately bailed on her the moment real-life consequences showed up. I made a different choice. I chose to preserve my own dignity and self-respect. And finally, for the first time in over a year, I don't feel like the bad guy for making that choice. The hardest part of all of this isn't losing Lisa. It's losing the relationship I thought I had with my daughter. Sophie may come around eventually when she's older and gain some perspective on what really happened during this time. Or she might not. I've had to accept that I can't control that outcome no matter how much it hurts. What I can control is how I handle myself going forward. I can control whether I maintain my integrity or sink to the level of manipulation and games that destroyed my marriage. I can control whether I show up consistently for the people in my life who actually want me there, like my sister Crystal, who has been my rock through all of this. I've learned that sometimes the right thing to do is the hardest thing to do. Sometimes standing up for yourself means watching your whole world fall apart temporarily. Sometimes refusing to accept lies and betrayal means losing people you love, at least for a while. But I'd rather live honestly in a smaller world than live as a lie in a bigger one. Lisa threw away our family for someone who didn't even stick around when things got difficult. She chose temporary feelings over permanent commitments. She chose deception over communication. Those were her decisions to make, and now she gets to live with the consequences of those choices. I chose differently. I chose truth, even when it was painful. I chose dignity, even when it was lonely. I chose to be the kind of man I can respect when I look in the mirror, even if it meant losing everything I thought I wanted. And you know what? I'm okay with that choice. It's taken me a while to get here, but I'm genuinely okay with it. Some nights I sit in my quiet apartment and think about the life I thought I was building with Lisa and Sophie. I think about the plans we had made and the future we had talked about. But I don't feel bitter about it anymore. I feel grateful that I found out who Lisa really was before I wasted any more years pretending our marriage was something it wasn't. The truth is, I'm 42 years old and I have a lot of life left to live. I have skills, I have financial stability, I have my health, and I have people who genuinely care about me. I have the opportunity to build something real with someone who actually wants to be with me whenever I'm ready for that. Lisa can keep Dylan if she manages to get him back, or she can find someone else to fill that void she was trying to fill through our entire marriage. That's not my problem to solve anymore. As for Sophie, I'll always be her father. My door will always be open if she ever wants to understand what really happened during this time. I'll always show up to her swim meets and school events if she wants me there. I'll always answer her calls and support her in whatever way she'll let me. But I won't chase after people who have decided they don't want me in their lives. I won't beg for scraps of affection from people who have shown me exactly where I stand in their priorities. I'm done settling for less than I deserve. I'm done accepting lies as the price of keeping a family together. I'm done being the only one fighting for relationships that the other person has already checked out of. For the first time in a very long time, I'm choosing myself. And that feels pretty good. Uppy date. It's been about 6 months since I wrote this post, and I wanted to add a quick update for anyone following this story. Sophie reached out to me last month. She asked if we could meet for coffee, just the two of us. She didn't apologize exactly, but she said she was starting to understand that things were more complicated than I realized. It's not a full reconciliation, but it's a start. Lisa, as far as I know, is still single. I heard through mutual friends that Dylan never came back, and she hasn't found anyone else. I genuinely hope she finds happiness eventually, but I'm glad it's not my responsibility anymore. I've started dating someone new. Nothing serious yet, but she's honest, kind, and doesn't play games. It's refreshing to be with someone who says what they mean and means what they say. To anyone going through something similar, trust your instincts, document everything, and don't accept being treated as less than your worth. It gets better, but only if you're willing to make the hard choices that lead to a better life.